my name is Aaron Adams, and you are listening to Real Estate Tips and Tricks on News Talk 1430 WXNT. I have been a full-time real estate investor since 2000, and I have purchased over 1,800 properties since then. The last few years, I've actually been traveling around the country, teaching the techniques that I've learned and I've put in practice to investors and individuals just like you. A lot of people say, who are you and where did you come from? Well, I was a high school teacher that was working on a master's degree back in 1998. I was teaching U.S. history and I was teaching Spanish, and like many of you, I had a 9-to-5 job. I was making $40,000 a year, and I drove a 2-door Hyundai Accent. Not to plug Hyundai, but I also had $10,000 in credit card debt. And one night I was up late watching an infomercial, and a real estate infomercial came on. Now, this was back in the early days of eBay, and instead of spending the $1,500 that the individual who was hawking his real estate course wanted me to spend, I got on eBay and found the same course in a cassette tape form for less than $100. About a week later, those cassettes came to me, and I started to listen to them and started to learn about real estate. What was interesting to me was at that time, I was working on a master's degree in business. And I felt like there was this whole new world that I was starting to learn about, real estate. Something that I didn't understand, a whole new language, if you will. Mortgages and deeds and seller carrybacks and lease options. And what's even more ironic is I was actually a homeowner. I had purchased my first home and thought back to when I closed on that property and realized that half of the paperwork that I signed when I bought that home, I didn't even know what it was. I went into the title and escrow and sat down and knew that they had qualified me for a mortgage and knew that I had put money down on that house. But other than that, there was a giant stack of paperwork that I didn't know anything about. And I thought, how ironic that here I was with a 4-year degree, teaching high school, working on a master's degree in business, and I didn't even understand the paperwork from my own mortgage. And I'm sure that many of you are nodding emphatically because you were in the same situation when you purchased your home. And as I move forward in my personal real estate education, I started to learn what those words meant, like deeds and trust and seller carrybacks and cash flow properties and gross rent multipliers, and educate myself to the whole world of real estate. And ironically, I actually did learn techniques and tips that I was able to utilize to make money in real estate. And just to give an example, the first property that I purchased was a duplex in a little town called Hemet, California. I bought that duplex for $100,000. I spent a few $1,000s fixing it up and was able to sell it a few months later for $175,000. Now think what that kind of money would potentially do for you and in your life to be able to get a check after commissions and closing costs for over $50,000. And think then at my particular situation and how as a high school teacher making $40,000 a year, my paycheck every 2 weeks was just a few $100s. And I was completely blown away. I was completely floored. And I was completely hooked. And became even more aggressive in my efforts to learn about real estate. Now, there was a lot of luck involved with that first property. I'll be the first to admit. I was lucky that I started buying property in Riverside County, which from 2000 to 2004 became the hottest appreciating real estate market that we've probably seen in the last 50 years. That was certainly luck. I was lucky that I was able to get the financing for that duplex and not try to buy a property that was in such a bad shape that a lender wouldn't lend on it, because I didn't understand some of those things. But more than anything, I was lucky that I was up late that night and saw the infomercial. But even with all the luck, there were certain things that I did right that enabled me to make that money. And those are the kinds of things that I'll be sharing with you on a weekly basis and that I want to share with you going forward. We do have a website. It's invest317.com. That's INVEST 317.com. We have a ton of information at that website that you can see. We do free info sessions here locally. In fact, our next one is July 25th. You can also call our phone number, which is 866-612-0346. Those are all good ways to get more information if you're interested in the types of things that we're talking about here today. Well, I can tell you that over the next 4 years, I purchased over 60 properties. And I purchased everything from a mobile home park to a 20-unit apartment complex, duplexes, and houses. And I really began to refine and develop techniques to find good deals, to get money to buy good deals, to actually close on those deals, to get sellers to loan me money to buy those deals. And I was able to utilize those techniques over and over again to make money in real estate. And for the past 3 years, I've been traveling around the country teaching individuals just like you what those techniques are and how to use them. Now, my father was from Indianapolis. I grew up in Las Vegas and Atlantic City, New Jersey, but my father was from Indianapolis. He grew up on the east side, went to Tech High School, played basketball there. In fact, my grandmother has lived in the same house on the east side of Indianapolis at 10th and Emerson since the late 50s. And she was actually born and raised in Beech Grove. So I have roots here on my dad's side of the family. In fact, honestly, my father was the only person to ever leave Indy. And around 2004, I really started to get apprehensive and nervous about the California real estate market because I had watched property values double and triple over that time frame. And I became nervous to buy more properties because that same duplex that I had purchased for $100,000 just a few years before was now selling for over $300,000. And what was ironic was that it was renting for the same amount, $1,500 a month, $750 on each side. The rent amount hadn't changed, but the property values had doubled and tripled. And so I became very apprehensive about that. And I started to look at this little nest egg that I had built up and realized that in the few short years that since I had started and bought that first property, I had now made over $1 million in property. And which was strange to me because I still felt like the high school teacher that drove the two-door Hyundai and had the $10,000 in credit card debt. In my mind, I was still that same guy. And was actually surprised to see that I was now a millionaire and actually a little bit scared about that. And what I started doing was I was afraid to buy more properties in that California market because I just had the sense that that market was starting to peak. Now, in hindsight, that market actually didn't peak until 2006, early 2007. So when I sold all the properties that I had in California and started to look to get out of that market, I still could have theoretically stayed in that market for another 24 months. But I got out and I sold high, if you will, and started to look around. And my father actually said, you really should think about Indianapolis. Now, ironically enough, my own father was what's called in the real estate industry a hard money lender. He and a group of friends had raised a pool of money, and they were loaning money to investors all over the country to invest in real estate. So my father knew a lot about real estate, he knew a lot about money, and he said, you should take that little nest egg of yours, take it back to Indianapolis, and just invest in $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 single-family homes. Well, if you know anything about California's real estate market, you're probably very much aware that there is really no such thing as a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 home. Home prices start at $80,000, $90,000, $100,000, and those are in distressed, lower-income areas. I couldn't even get my mind around the fact that those types of homes existed. So I got on a plane, I came out to Indianapolis, and I actually had an uncle, still have an uncle, who was a contractor. And one of the workers on his crew had inherited a house over at 16th and Emerson on the east side of Indianapolis, and wanted to get rid of it for $10,000. And he and I drove over and we took a look at the house. And as I looked at the house, I realized it really only needed about $25,000 in work. And I remember saying to the contractor, what kind of neighborhood is this? And they said, well, it's working class, blue collar. It's got, stable, probably 60-70% homeowners live here. And I said, okay, well, how much could I rent it out for? And they said, well, a 3-bedroom house in this neighborhood would probably rent for $650. So as I did the math, all I could think of was, okay, I'm going to get $650 a month rent for this house, and I'm going to spend a total of $35,000. To get $650 a month at that time in 2004 in California, I would have had to have spent $100,000, almost 3 times the amount that I was able to get for that Indianapolis property. At that moment, I had an epiphany. I needed to sell every other property that I had in California, relocate, and return to my roots, my father's roots, and start buying properties in this Indianapolis market. And when we come back, I'll be sharing with you the reasons, the specific reasons why this Indianapolis market is such a strong real estate market, and why since arriving here and buying my first properties in 2004, I've purchased over 1,800 properties and now work with over 150 people here in Indianapolis buying and selling properties. Currently, our company purchases over 20 properties a month, and we sell them to investors all over the world. A lot of you don't realize that Indianapolis is quite possibly the hottest cash flow property rental market in the country, and that's what we're going to talk about today. What we're doing here, why we love this market, and why this is such a strong real estate market. Like I mentioned earlier, invest317.com is our website, and your number to call us with your specific questions is 866-612-0346. You're listening to Real Estate Tips and Tricks with Aaron Adams. I'm Aaron Adams, and this is News Talk 1430 WXNT.